Hello, class. Here's going to be the lecture for the lecture 6, which I was going to give last Thursday, and I wasn't feeling well. So here is the lecture. I'm going to give it today, and I'll be posting it on my YouTube channel. You'll see it later in the day today. I'm going to talk today about about GDP. I was going to talk about that in the previous lecture, but decided to hold off because that was the day that the trains weren't running, and most of the students couldn't get to that lecture. So I'm going to talk about that. For those students that have seen this material before, you can just skip to the later discussion on the Great Depression. But I want this for students that have not seen a discussion on GDP, on gross domestic product. I want them to understand what GDP is and how GDP relates to international trade and on capital flows. So I want you to understand that. That's certainly an important part of international economics, and understanding both trade and capital flows is understanding GDP. So I'll introduce that topic. For those students who have not seen this material before, as I say, if you have, please feel free to skip to the next section. This page talks about what's called national accounting. Gross domestic product is part of what's called national accounting. Basically, it's accounting. GDP is an accounting measure, and it's the value of all final goods and services produced within a country or region over some period. It's in terms of monetary value, which items exchange in the market. So that's the important thing, is whatever is paid for it, even if it turns out later that it might have been paid too much, at the time of the value, at the value which the items exchange in the market. It's a measurement only of final goods. That is, when the final goods that are consumed by businesses or households, but those are final goods, not the intermediate production, but the final consumption of those goods. It's distinguished from gross national product. You may have heard of that. That measures national income, including production by all citizens of a country anywhere in the world. So gross national product, the gross national product of the United States, for example, would include money that your professor earns here in Japan, even though I don't live I'm not living in my home country and haven't for many years. The GNP would include production by by people like myself that no longer live in my home country. So that's different. That is, gross domestic product only concerns expenditure that's made within the national or regional borders. Here's a short discussion on the shortcomings of GDP. Just go over that quickly. I don't. That's not important for our discussion now. What is important is the definition of a mathematical identity, and we'll see the importance of this in terms of GDP. And the GDP measures are identities. They're mathematical identities, and that is, an identity is an equality relationship. And that's a triple sign. The equal sign is 2, but an identity is 3 lines. And so the difference is that A and B contain some variables, and A and B produce the same value regardless of what values are substituted for the variables. That is, they define the same function. And what's different is the function is on both sides. It can be perhaps on the left side, it can be on the right side. Whereas an ordinary function with the equal sign with the two lines means that there is only that something is equal to the function which is on the other side. Where here the function is on either side, so that if something changes on one side, if it changes on the right side, then it also changes on the left side. And if it changes on the left side, it also changes on the right side. So the gross domestic product components, that is, it's made of parts. And the major parts of the gross domestic product, GDP, are personal household consumption expenditures. That's here. That's C. Private investment expenditures. That's I. Government consumption expenditures. That's denoted by G. The entire consumption within an economy on exports, or what's sold, the value of products sold outside the country, and that's EX. Then expenditures on imports, expenditures made for goods imported into the country, that's IM. So net exports is the difference between expenditures on exports and expenditures on imports. That's exports minus imports, or net exports. Savings, that's what households, businesses, and governments nets. That's the savings that are made within a country. And we use the term Y for GDP. We've already used up G, so we can't use up G because we use that for government consumption expenditures. And so economists typically use the letter Y. The details on that, C, personal household consumption, or durable goods. That's goods such as, say, automobiles. It could be computers, other items that last for a while. Non-durable goods are goods that are consumed that last less than 3 years. I think food falls in that. You buy it and it's consumed right away, or it even could be consumed within a year or two. But that's a non-durable good. Services are commodities that cannot be stored and which are consumed at the place and time of purchase. If you go out and get a haircut, for example, that's a service. If you use an ATM to get money out of your bank, that's a service. So those are examples of services. Private domestic consumption, that's denoted by the letter I. That's two parts. Expenditures by businesses on fixed investment. Fixed investment are expenditures on commodities that we use in a production process for more than 1 year. Fixed investment, and if a business buys a computer, for example, and that'll be used in the production of goods and services, so that's typically lasts for more than a year. Well, that's a fixed investment. If fixed investment is further divided into non-residential and residential investment. For example, if a household buys if there's the building of a building for residential investment, either for a single-family construction or multifamily construction, that is part of residential investment. It also changes in business inventories. As inventories go up and down, as inventories go down, that's considered a reduction in investment. As business inventories go up, that's considered an increase in investment. Government expenditures, that's G, include purchase of goods, services, and structures from domestic firms and from the rest of the world by all levels of government, and compensation to government employees. is also considered a government expenditure, but not transfer payments. As we noted, NX or net exports, exports minus imports, and note that that is an identity. So if exports change, then net exports change. If net exports go up or down, then either or both exports or imports must change. Savings are defined as GDP minus private consumption and government consumption. That is, savings are identically equal to Y. S equals Y minus C minus G, private consumption and government consumption. And then we break all these GDP components are broken into foreign and domestic components, so that that's private consumption of domestically produced goods and private consumption of foreign produced goods. That's C, CD, and CF. GD and GF, that's domestic and foreign for government, and domestic and foreign purchases of private investment, domestic and foreign. For example, a private domestic purchase of foreign goods for investment, if investment is made by within a country by goods that are produced abroad, then that is called IF. So the total investment equals domestic plus foreign. Total government is domestic plus foreign. Total consumer, domestic plus foreign. Then imports, though, are then all of the F components. CF plus GF plus IF equals imports. So those are imports. Then Y equals, then you can take, if we take these definitions, then we can play around with them. If you use just algebra, because you can use algebra in an identity, and we can redefine the GDP as domestic consumption plus exports. So you can just play around with that. And you can also redefine domestic consumption as total consumption minus imports of foreign produced goods, and that's true for investment and government services. So we can substitute these into CD, this term into CD, this term for ID here into ID, and for government domestic here into GD, and then we can get this term, a change of this term we rearrange here, and the F minus I minus F plus I, or CF plus IF plus GF, but that's just simply imports. We could define that as imports. Those are identically defined as imports. So we determine here that in fact that GDP is consumption plus investment plus government plus exports minus imports. So GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government plus net exports. Okay, so now then we can rearrange this term and solve for net exports, because we put it on that side, and we get net exports are total GDP minus consumption minus investment minus government. Then net exports equals exports minus imports. And that's identically, I should put that identically equal to Y minus C plus I plus G. So net exports greater than zero are a trade surplus. Net exports less than zero, trade deficit. Then the net capital flow definition is savings minus investment. That tells us the net capital flow. And what does that mean? If investment is we need savings so we can make an investment. Investment is a consumption for the purpose of future production. by businesses and household and government. So we need to have savings in order to make investment. So if the savings are greater than investment within a country, savings greater than investment, then there's excess capital within a country. If that happens, then that country or a region is a net lender to countries or regions outside of it. And if savings are less than investment, if savings are less than investment, if there is a savings shortfall, then that country or region is a net borrower from the rest of the world. So then we take that definition of net exports equals exports minus imports equals identically equal to, that figure is there, total GDP minus consumption minus investment minus government. And then we can determine that savings equals, since this is, since investment is, savings is identically equal to output minus consumption minus government, then net exports, this is very important, is net exports equals exports minus imports, which equals savings minus investment. This is a very important outcome. And for those students who have not done this, what I want you to do, what I'd like you to do is go through and just solve these it's very simple algebra, but I want you to see how this is derived. And this is a very, very important lesson in international economics. This is an international economics department, so in order to understand international economics, it's very important to understand this equation and this equation. This is the equation for net exports. Exports minus imports equals savings, identically equal to savings minus investments. Excuse me. Sorry. Net exports is savings minus investment within a country. So that's a very important result, because what it says is that net exports, that is exports minus imports, are positive if a country saves more than it invests. That's simply what net exports are. If a country saves more, if people in a country save more than they invest within the country, then there's an excess of they're a net lender to the rest of the world, but they also have a trade surplus. That country will have a trade surplus. That's where trade surpluses come from. It's an excess of savings minus investment. Trade deficit is when there's a shortage of savings so savings minus investment are negative, then this figure is negative. And there's a trade deficit, which also means savings is less than investment. That country is a net borrower from the rest of the world. So this is a very important identity. So if net exports go up, net exports increase, then that means that either savings increases or investment decreases. So these are very important identities to understand both trade flow and capital flow. This involves the net lender, net borrower is where we're talking about capital flow, and trade flow, whether there's a trade surplus or trade deficit, is shown here. And so what that's telling us is that there's a relationship, a very important relationship between savings and capital flow and trade flow. All of those are interconnected. This is very important to understand, and when you can understand that, you're going to understand something that most people do not understand. So keep this in mind when you hear people talk about trade surpluses or trade deficit, as if a trade surplus or a trade deficit are by themselves a good or a bad thing. Remember that all that a trade surplus or deficit tells us is whether a country is a net exporter or importer. Now it's just this is some capital trade and capital flow comparisons. Some of this. Some of this is stuff that I presented the previous semester. So this stuff has to involves capital flow. Now that I'm looking at that, I may want let's not worry about that right now. If students are interested in their if any of the students are interested in capital flows in their presentation, and presentation, then please come to me and we'll talk more about that.